Well, okay. This is Friday night. I'm Erica Lukes, and this is UFO Classified. And as always, I'm happy to be here. I've got a little change of scenery tonight because I was getting tired of looking at UFO books for the moment. And so this is the front entrance to my Pilates studio. And you can see behind me one of my paintings. I'm just going to show that off for a moment. But that was one of the first things that I did on a larger canvas. And so, as you know, I love painting and all sorts of things. So I just had to share that with you. But my Pilates studio is really a lovely, lovely place. And maybe Mufasa will come out and hang out by the door. So all the people getting pizza will see him. But hopefully he will. I want to thank everybody for being here. And I especially want to thank Peter for helping me get things out on social media. And I also want to thank Mario, who has been, both of these gentlemen have been so important to UFO Classified, as have my wonderful Patreons. And I want to just mention them really quick because each week we're getting new people to help support the show, and that means the world to me. So I want to thank Mark and Tommy and Jay, Deb, UFO researcher, Bob McGuire, Dave Beatty, Hoska, Ed Powers, Andrew Krause, and Mario. So thank you all. And I want to thank everybody for getting into chat and donating super stickers. It's great. There are a lot of costs that go into all of this, and then the research, and then now I'm moving on to my new project with Jack Brewer, which is expanding Frontiers Research. You can go to that website, expandingfrontiersresearch.org, and you can learn more about the exciting things that we are doing. And let me tell you, Jack has been busy behind the scenes. So this is going to be fun to see what shakes out when we get some of the things that we're working on to put out there for you. So hey, Drew, hey, Renee, Peter, Justin, Scott, Jim, UFO John Doe, Amy. I just love you guys. Thanks so much for being in here. And Arlene and Jim, thanks for staying up late. And Phil, how nice to see you. My favorite troublemaker is in chat. That pretty much makes me happy. So anyway, thanks for your support. And Scott, thank you for the super sticker. You guys rock. So I want to, first of all, just invite my guest on. I'll quit talking here. But Christian Lambright has been on UFO Classified before, and I find really a lot of value in everything that he's done, a lot of the research that he does behind the scenes that people don't necessarily know about. And I think they should, because Chris wrote a book called X Descending, and that was about Ray Stanford and also the Bennewitz affair. And he is a brilliant researcher. He digs into things. People in chat, Chris, are very excited to hear from you tonight, and we've got questions for you already in chat. But you are, I mean, you're an author. You give us your 411. Tell us all about your life.
Interestingly enough, I'm getting some interesting audio feedback here, so I'll check that in a minute.
I am too.
Like I'm getting a delayed audio. I'm hearing. I see you're sitting there. All right. Well, now it's my turn. It's quiet. I'm getting some interesting audio feedback here, so I'll check that in a minute. That's interesting. See, I'm hearing my own voice.
Yeah, and that's weird. I think it's because I just muted my mic, and is it coming from your end somewhere? How? Well, you muted your mic, but now I can't hear it, though. Yeah, you muted your mic, I think. Here, wait. Okay, I think you muted your mic. Do I need
All
to
right,
keep
now I've got it back
there you
here.
Go. There you go. I can still hear that.
Anyway, I'll deal with it for now and see what I can come up with.
Is your computer, I mean, is there something coming through your computer?
I don't believe so. It's kind of strange here. Let me just see what this does here.
So maybe, do you want to like pop out and then come back in and see if it works?
Not that I know of. It's strange. I've not ever had this experience before here.
Well, welcome to UFO Classified.
Give me just 1 second. I'll try that and see. This is a strange one, so flip me off for a second and I'll see what I can do here.
Okay. All right, guys. So again, thank you for being here. And hey, Mark, nice to see you. And Phil, I love your comments. So anyway, yeah, and I do have a new backdrop. Amy, thanks for noticing. I just needed to change things around. So I wanted to kind of show this portion of my studio. I have, for those of you who don't know, I am a Pilates instructor and I have a beautiful 4,000 square foot studio here in Salt Lake, and that a portion of that houses my archive, and I love it. It is open to the public. I know no more lounge sign. I'm sorry, it might be back next week. Who knows? But Mama needed a little kind of a switch me up, and so I don't know, it's kind of nice and bright and sunny here. But then we get to watch people walk by, all this stuff. And Arlene, I'm glad that you're actually watching this live. And I want to also just give a shout out to the people on Facebook and also Twitter. I can't see your responses unless I'm here, but thank you for getting in and watching the show. I appreciate your support. So we're going to add Christian back in.
I'm still having some kind of a curious...
Can you take your headphones off and unplug them? I don't know. Is somebody is your phone?
Strange. I've never had this. All right. Give me 1 more second. I'm going to drop off. Yeah, I'm going to drop off for 1 second and try something else here. Give me 1 second.
Thank you. You guys, I'm telling you, this is the way the show rolls. So I'm telling you, but that's okay. And I want to also just, Hambert Full, thank you about the Jack Brewer collaboration. We're both really excited. I speak with Jack almost every day, and I'm telling you what we're working on behind the scenes is going to really shine a light on some things and perhaps just, make a couple people unhappy. But, at the end of the day, you've got to do a good job and also make sure that you are promoting the truth. And that is one of the things that Jack Brewer and I are both very passionate about. I know all of you are the same way in chat, and that's why you're watching this show. And I also want to take, Lou Elizondo is affecting cyber interference. I'm sure there's probably a white truck across the parking lot doing something. I'm just kidding. But I want to give a shout out to Steve Cambrian, who has a wonderful show on YouTube. He did a very nice intro and mentioned my work and the show, and I thought that was really, really cool. He makes me laugh. He does some good things, and I know that he is very he's kind of in the same place that I think all of us are. It's like we get into this subject, we're handed specific things that we're supposed to believe, and after we have our behinds handed to us multiple times, we start to the stars in our eyes get kind of a little dull, and then we step back and say, wait a minute, maybe there's a lot of dysfunction in this subject, and it is important to definitely expose people who are not on the up and up. And that I've done that. I've been doing that. It's not the easiest job, but it's something that we all have to do if we want to make the subject better for people that have had experiences, for people who have that are wanting to learn about everything. It's just really, and hey, Steve's Aquatics, you're on your way to Vegas. Yeah, sweet. So at least we've got nice weather. And so here we go again. Christian.
It is very strange. Any of the camera settings that I use are giving me a double audio, and I've never had this before. It's delayed action. Very strange here. Hold on for me one. Interesting.
That is strange.
Hang on 1 second for me. Audio.
It is strange.
Yep, it is very strange. I don't know. Can you hear me at all now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
I don't know if that's...
But that is so weird because I can definitely hear the feedback.
Yeah,
I'm getting things with a delayed reaction. That is so bizarre. And anybody in chat, Give us
I'm getting the same thing. This is
feedback.
really bizarre. This is really bizarre.
I can definitely hear the feedback. Is there any other phone or computer on anywhere? Anybody in chat?
Hang on for me one moment here. I got one other thing. Yep. Is there any other phone or computer on anywhere? Anybody in chat? Hang on for me one moment here. I got one other thing.
Is it open on another window?
How about now? Can you hear me at all now?
No, I can hear you, but it's like is it there a screen open on your window that's playing the show?
I can't really.
Is it open on another window?
No, it shouldn't be, because I mean, obviously this.
No, I can hear you, but it's like is it there a screen open on your window that's playing the show?
Not that I know of, because the only thing I've got it in is I've got audio volume turned off completely. This is really strange. I've never had this happen before.
Well, at least people know that they're entering the outer limits. Thanks, Scott. Every time you come to UFO Classified, you're, entering the outer limits. So Drew Williams said to try muting the page you have open, not your computer page. I don't know. But now I can't hear you. Oh, je ne sais pas. Do you have Twitter on? No Discord? Nothing? I'm learning sign language. This is why I have my notepad handy so I can write you notes. But I can't hear you though. Anyway, you know what? We're just going to roll with it. And so we're going to just unmute your mic and we will figure life out. I guess you could, well, no, I don't know if I want to do anything. Let's see. I don't know. Who knows? But anyway, I think, yeah, you're just unmute your mic, I guess. We'll just roll with it. We'll totally roll with it. I can't hear you. I do need my cue cards, Jim, I know. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I mean, I don't know why you can hear me. That's totally dumb. Can't you? You can hear me. Oh, my Lord. Baby Joseph. Mark, don't make fun of me, or I'm telling you.
Yeah, I know the microphone. Can you hear me at all now?
Yeah. Let's roll with it.
No, but it's funny because when I hear you, it's also delayed action. This is really strange.
That is so weird. I mean, I wonder if you could, because you got your camera all set up, but I don't know if your phone is charged. And
I'm getting almost like a. Yeah, this is.
Can you try your cell phone?
You know what? Hang on for me 1 second.
Okay, thank you. Sunspots and gremlins. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being patient. I know it's a good time waiting to happen right now. So anyway, on that note, you guys, what's happening in your world? As you know, I've been digging into my favorite area in Utah and finding some interesting things that are shaken out. And I want to just give a shout out to my friend Jody, who has the UFO campground up next to Skinwalker Ranch. If you guys get a chance, this is a lovely, lovely time of year to go up there and hang out. And as I've mentioned on my show, I am going to UFO John Doe, you're invited, but all of you guys are invited. I want to plan a camping trip to go stay at UFO campground next spring. So put that on your agenda. You guys can come tour the studio. We can have a meeting of the minds and then go cause some trouble in Utah, which, that's kind of my favorite thing here. I'm kind of a little, troublemaker. And hey, Dave, nice to see you. And I know you guys, dino beavers. Yeah, Steve Cambion has a real dino beaver. Don't we all? Anyway, so yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys, and thanks for being patient. And so, and seriously, Mark, come to Utah. I would totally, and it's a cute dino beaver. That's interesting. That's good. I wonder if what Robert Bigelow saw was a cute dino beaver. Probably not. I don't even think he ever really went up there that much, to be honest, but whatever. So anyway, when Chris comes on the show, we've got some good things to talk about. As I mentioned, he wrote a book, and hey, Simon, hey, Scotty, about Paul Bennewitz and Ray Stanford, and he's done extensive research on both of those people. Ray has been on the show. It's been quite a while. I should probably get him back on, just because he is such an interesting guy, for sure, who has a lot of stuff. I wish I could go to Ray's house. That would be absolutely wonderful. So, and then Snow, Erica, does Fugle still have you blocked? Yeah, he does, but that's okay. That's I think, and I want to just read this quote from Chris, because Chris has got some amazing, you need to go to xdeskpublishing.com articles, because he has got wonderful articles on Fravor, on TTSA, on some of these things that we all find very fascinating, and they're very relevant to what we see in the UFO community today. And I was reading one of his articles, and I really, really, really loved this quote. Because it just reminds me so much of how I feel, and I think how some of us feel. It says, questions here, referring to the article, can lead to conclusions difficult to ignore. For my part, simply trying to get the truth does not necessarily mean being against anything or anyone, but you can, and almost certainly will, eventually come up against those trying to keep you from it. While I can understand that secrecy is at times necessary, too often we've seen secrecy abused to hide self-serving, if not illegal, actions by people only pretending to be acting in good faith. And so the saying, trust everyone, but cut the cards, is advice with a point. Questions that raise doubt should be asked and deserve to be answered, especially when where trust and your money and your beliefs are on the line. And I love that quote. I think that was a really great quote. And so, Fugle doesn't like asking me questions, that's for sure. Why did Fugle block me? Actually, it was really interesting, and I'll have to share the moments that led up to him blocking me. But I was just asking him specifically, okay, where, you've promised us transparency since you bought the ranch. Where is that? You promised that you would be open, with your research. What are you doing? So it was asking questions that other people have asked. They haven't been blocked, but for some reason, I am the slimy malcontent. This is what one of the best alleged businessmen in Utah has said about me. And again, I'm promising you that I will make that t-shirt up. And you guys can all wear one. That'd be great. And so, Christian.
All right. Can you hear me at all now?
That sounds great.
Fine. I think it must have been that other headset. I switched it. These are my better ones, but for some reason, that one with a mic on it I have no clue. So,
well, praise the Lord.
This is why I like to test things before. No, I'm kidding. It was working fine when you and I talked before the show. It was,
that's
perfect.
Interesting. But you know what, though? That's what I have to say. This is part of the charm of the show, really.
There you go.
And then you can laugh. And I always have to go back to, oh my gosh, I did a show with Jan Aldrich, and I don't think you've seen it, but I will send you the link, because honestly, that was one of my favorite shows. And cute Jan was sitting out in his car. He's got some cell reception problems where he is. And it was just like the funniest. And I literally had cue cards like the whole time. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
It was perfect for a while.
That was good. There you go. Can you hear an echo again? Because I can't. You have gremlins. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you talking, but right now I'm getting all the audio that you were talking about a moment ago.
That is really strange. I'm sorry.
And I'm trying.
Buddy. Yeah, and Arlene, you're right. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, synthwave fugal, cloudy. I love you. So anyway, I mean, I don't know. Can you? Yeah, I mean, do your headphones have a microphone on
The
it?
headphones have no microphone on them this time, and
You,
that thing is completely unplugged.
you sound really good.
It was there good for a second, and now I'm hearing everything you've been talking all the time, like it's replaying everything.
Well, that must be annoying.
It's
That's
funny.
like,
Right now, it's all the audio you were giving a minute ago when you said when Chris comes on the show, he'll be all this. It's like it's delayed by 10. You know what? Give me one more second.
okay.
I'm just going to try a different way to connect to this. I'll be right back.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and the bandwidth thing might be it. Who knows, guys? Okay, so, and I really appreciate your chat and everything, and your comments. And yes, I think, and Cloudy, like seriously, that you are cracking me up. I do love that, the synthwave, and I especially enjoy wearing my right pant leg higher than my left pant leg. I think that is a really great way to go about fashion. And so, yeah, we've got some, it was an interesting thing, guys, and thanks for bringing this up about being blocked on Twitter. That was a very strange thing. I've always been, pretty respectful with him, and I don't, it was strange, but we will see what shakes out. I think if, again, if you don't have, if you are being asked questions about providing information that you promised, I think that does speak volumes about you and the lack of information that you might have because you can't present it. And I know that people like to say the TV show is presenting scientific information, but it's just basically a bunch of dudes pointing lasers and, up at the sky and shooting rockets. I don't know. Call me crazy. Okay, you're back.
All right. I think I need to owe you an apology.
Why?
For some reason, I think there was a Firefox browser. StreamYard doesn't work with my Firefox browser. I had nothing on there, not your show or anything, but for some reason, I just went into Task Manager and killed Firefox completely. That may have done it.
Really?
Oh, I will.
So you're basically naughty.
I will buy the drinks next time. My apologies. Considering I'm an IT guy, how that kind of crap happens to me, I have no idea. So, but I just killed it completely in the Task Manager, and that dropped it immediately. So I'm sorry to waste everyone's time on that. But anyway.
Yeah, you sound marvelous. And I just want to say really quickly, and sorry to interrupt, but while I'm thinking about this, because somebody made something, a comment about my ex, and if, for those of you who don't know, back in November of last year, Fox 13 Utah did a story on my situation and the domestic abuse in the National Guard, and they're covering up everything and things, pretty significant things. And the second part of that story by Nate Carlisle will be airing this Sunday night, and so you can watch that, learn a little bit more about my story and the story of what I've kind of endured. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Sorry, Christian, I just had to, well, I'm thinking about it. I wanted to throw that out there. But Sean Drew, good morning. Nice to see you. Problem fixed. Okay, so let's talk. Let's cause some trouble.
Yeah, well, I seem to be one of those malcontents myself.
Good. Good t-shirt.
Oh yeah, you come up with great t-shirts. But I guess the reason I sent you the link this morning to the papers that I had written, and I give full credit to a lot of people, who've helped me with the things that I've written. My friend Tommy Bland. I'll even go so far as thanking John Greenwald for the things that he comes out with, and everybody who's contributed and come up with things. The problem that I have is what I see is lack of analytical thought. Question why? Why would something like this? I have questions about the things that I thought for sure were good information that was coming out, that now I'm not so sure we're not being fed that information all along, because when you stop think about it, it makes zero sense. But if anybody wants, I sent that link, which you're free to post. It doesn't show up on my website anymore because months ago I just got frustrated and took all the articles I'd written down. Just nobody seemed to be picking up on it, but maybe that's the same thing. I've missed things. But it started for me when I began to question why, well, frankly, why Douglas Kurth this is back in 2019, why Douglas Kurth seemed to be almost like written out to a great extent of the history of all this, when he's the first one who showed up working at Bigelow Aerospace. Actually, before Bass was even called Bass, he was hired. But then when all the publicity came out about it and everybody's doing interviews, why wouldn't you interview him? And he fortunately, he finally answered some emails that I had, and that raised even more questions, such as if he had come and applied to work at Bigelow Aerospace and had told them during his interviews that he was involved in this Nimitz incident, which I guarantee you, if I was going to work at Bigelow Aerospace and I knew he was interested in UFOs, you better believe, and I had something great to say, I'd put it on my resume. I put it in my interview. So he did that. But one of the stunning things that he told me was, even though he'd worked there all the way up until I think maybe 2012 or so, when they let everyone go, there was no indication that anyone there had ever told him that they had heard about the Nimitz incidents before he was hired. And it wouldn't have mattered until I was made aware of the fact that apparently Harry Reid had told Robert Bigelow about the Nimitz incidents. Must have been not long after they occurred, however Harry Reid heard about them. And Bigelow passed that information on to Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis. So I'm like, okay. But then he sat on it the way it was put. And I wrote this in one of the papers,
Right.
One of those papers that I've got. He sat on it for a couple of years. And I'm like, why would you sit on it for a couple of years? I mean, if they're going to do it 2007, why wouldn't Harry Reid have talked to Bigelow and just, unless Harry Reid wasn't supposed to be talking about it out of school to Bigelow? I don't know. But if you realize that, according to Hal Puthoff, this all started in June of 2007, and Kurth had gone and moved to Las Vegas in the early part, March, April, May, and began applying at Bigelow Aerospace, then the timing of the two events is almost beyond, I mean, it's not coincidental.
Right.
And then all of a sudden everything kicks off because now you got Kurth there. But the second part of this, and I've considered doing something on this, second part of this that I didn't quite follow was if Harry Reid had done all this to be quiet and under the table. I mean, if he had set up this program, and according, I think, to Lukotsky, it was going to be pure science, and it wasn't going to say UFOs, and Harry Reid had done this and intentionally wanted it unpublicized. According to Lua, now that we've, in the last 6 months, the OIG complaint form that Lou supposedly filed.
Mm-hmm. Supposedly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I was one of those, John Greenwald as well, who just sent to the IG and said, hey, FOI request for this. But they called me early one morning at like 6 o'clock and said, wait, I woke up and the guy on the phone saying, well, we can't send this information out because it's an active investigation. I said, well, can you even tell me, did you actually get a complaint form? Can't confirm or deny. So when I say allege, it's simply because nobody's gotten it out of the IG yet to know for certain if he sent it, although he obviously filled out a complete form and whatnot. The confusing parts of all this that seem to me as though somehow this is getting leaked out so the public can chew on it. If you recall, one of the first places that eventually had Stratton's name mentioned by Lou Elizondo, because if you remember in Lukotsky's book and Colm Keller's book, it was this character Axelrod. Everybody assumes that that's Stratton, but I didn't even check with John Greenwald on it. And so far, there's no definitive evidence that Axelrod is Stratton, although I'll bet $20 he is.
And so let's just, for people that don't know about, some of these people, because I have a lot of new people that I'm introducing to the show, and they're just like, okay, wait a minute, I'm lost. But, Bigelow, you've got Bigelow Aerospace, you've got Hal Puthoff, who was with Stanford research starting back in the 70s, and you've got Kit Green, some of these players that have been involved in the subject for a long time and have been kind of steering a narrative for whatever reason for their kicks, for money, who knows? I don't think the more I learn, the more I question. And then you also have the 2017 story that came out with the Navy pilots and all of these things. And you're talking about Kurth, who was obviously he claims he was a witness to something and got hooked up with Bigelow, whether that is Robert Bigelow, the millionaire person, slumlord. Anyway, did I say that out loud? Yes, that was my out loud voice. But Bigelow, who has been in the scene for a long, long time, again, stirring a narrative for what reason, nobody knows. And so and then you're talking about Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which is the book that Colm Kelleher, who is Bigelow's right-hand man, works for Bigelow, and then James Latatsky wrote. Did they both, was it Latatsky?
Lakatsky, L-A-C-A-T.
I'm so good with pronouncing names. And so, I mean, you've got this book that came out, and I want to just, ask you really quickly, like, when you read that book, what did you think?
Well, frankly, this is just me. I mean, I always preface everything that I start with by saying, this is what I think. Everybody's free to think whatever they want. Colm Kelleher wrote the first book, about the Skinwalker book, and he's done writing of his own, and he and Lakatsky and apparently with George Knapp got together and wrote the second book. But my take on whatever they talk about Skinwalker Ranch, this is just me. And if only because other people, including Ballet, had always said that there was never any UFO activity going on at their Skinwalker Ranch to begin with. And me personally, I know Harry Reid and Bigelow early on claimed that it was Lakatsky who had approached them about this project because he was interested in the Skinwalker Ranch. And even in the book, they say these guys had all been reading this book and I'm like, but the whole NIDS Skinwalker Ranch thing had pretty well ended in 2002, 2003. And as far as anyone has said, there wasn't anything going on at the ranch at all. I think even Eric Davis mentioned at some point there wasn't much else going on there. And so if somebody at the DIA calls you up and says, wow, I read this book and we want to go why would you say, sorry, dude, there's nothing going on there? I don't buy it. I mean, me personally, I don't think the Skinwalker Ranch scenario had a darn thing to do with the 2007 Harry Reid program. Right now, I'm thinking Harry Reid told Bigelow somehow in 2005 that the Nimitz events had occurred. And that was the inception point for this interest in it. But if Bigelow suddenly jumped on Nimitz, people are going to wonder, how did you know about this? And Harry Reid was in the Intelligence Committee at the time. And maybe he wasn't supposed to be saying anything much about it. They didn't want to start anything from it. But obviously Bigelow had told a couple of people about it. And then in 2007, when Kurth shows up, the perfect person who's now brought it to them, Harry Reid's now, this is just my theorizing here, Harry Reid's, either way you look at it, is off the hook. But now they can come up and claim that Harry Reid wanted this program done, not because he went to Bigelow with it, but because Lakatsky approached Bigelow, and then Bigelow goes to Harry Reid, and the whole story is there, and Harry Reid decides, okay, we'll get you $22 million. I have no problem with Harry Reid. I have no problem with Robert Bigelow. I have no problem with their effort to do a UFO project, whatever you want to call it. I have no problem with that. And as far as Ireland goes, one of my favorite places. I had a gentleman from Ireland just write me the other day, wanted to read the book. I love the place. But needless to say, I've not met these people, so I don't have any axe to grind with any of them as far as that goes. But it strikes me the problem comes into play when, according to Lou's OIG complaint form, in June of 2008, before the OSAP contract ever even was put out for a broad area announcement. The contract wasn't given to Bigelow until August, September, sometime in that range when they won it. But in June of 2008, according to Lou's complaint form, Stratton goes to the Pentagon and talks to Lou, one of the two guys who asked him, what do you think about UFOs? Wait a minute, how did O&I even know that the DIA and Harry Reid were cooking up this UFO project 2 months before the bid was even put out? And they met with Lou, according to Lou, a couple of times before they finally introduced him to Lukotsky. So did Lukotsky go to somebody and say, we need it, or what was happening? I don't understand, but it seems to me, why would Harry Reid turn around to O&I and say, okay, to me, there was a turning point, because by the time in the middle of 2009, when Harry Reid wanted to start his, he actually offered to start the special access program. He asked the director of national intelligence, I think it was, can we start this and that's the first place he ever used the term ATIP. But that's June of 2009. The program had already been running for almost a year. And then according to the book, they had this big dinner, Lou and his steak tartare dinner is the way I call it. They had this huge dinner. You have Lou there, you have Stratton, if it was Stratton, Axelrod, whoever the character's there. All these people together, but this was supposed to be Harry Reid's unpublicized UFO program. Hadn't even gotten through the first year yet. And according to Eric Davis, in one of the interviews he did, he finally says Hal ends up reporting to Lou. But wait, Hal was a subcontractor, Earthtech with Bass. Wouldn't he be violating something? Wouldn't he have gone back to Colin Kelleher, for example, and said, I can't be reporting. I'm a contract with Bass to do the research for Bass. Why didn't Colin go to talk to Lou? Somehow or other, this is why I finally, and it just dawned on me one time, that, oops, I think I lost you. Yep, there you go. Anyway, the point, let me back up for a minute. A lot of this is very interconnected, and it's one of the reasons that I put the link back to the page on my site where I have all these articles, because it's probably going to make a lot more sense for someone who really doesn't have the background understanding of how this all developed to look at the articles, especially the third one down or the fourth one down, which is the original PDF I wrote 2019. It's the longest one, but it's where all of this started and the questions come into play. And then it leads back to these other questions and why ATIP was, I think ATIP was the original group that Harry Reid started. They didn't have a name at first because it was just Hal and the rest of the guys working for Bigelow doing this. But at some point, the OSAP contract seems to me, I guess I use the term co-opted, because at some point, O&I and the Navy, whoever at the Office of the Secretary of Defense came into play, and suddenly now, according to Eric, Hal's reporting to Lou. But what happened to Harry Reid's DI contract? We've only seen the 1 year DIRD, the 38 DIRDs in the 1 year report. But if it ran on for another year or two, where's the rest of it? But anyway, it's easier to read all those papers because I think,
right, and they're great, and everybody should, because you've done exceptional work.
The part of this, as of this day, even though I've got some FOI requests in there are, it's funny because I'm not going to go off on the Wilson Davis memo, but there's one part of the Wilson Davis memo that doesn't make sense to me. It's where I was reading it all that I just finally got stuck. And it was at the point where they weren't going to, according to the document, they weren't going to tell Wilson anything. They were telling him, you don't have a need to know. He finally went and met with the three guys, the lawyer and the other two guys, and they're telling him, you don't have a right to know. And he's like, I'm supposed to be in charge of this. I have the right to know. After all that denial, suddenly they flip around and they tell him, well, okay, we've got something. And I'm like, wait a minute. You just stood your ground. You're a government contractor. You supposedly have classified stuff. If this guy's coming to you and he wants to know and he doesn't have need to know, you refer him back to his bosses, right? You tell him, you go back and get it. But they suddenly turned around and said, okay, well, we've got these things. And I'm like, why would you suddenly hand them something as though what? You want him to go away? You're going to tell him? That doesn't make sense. And the reason I bring that up is there are some aspects of all this that I'm confused about. I mean, I have no problem with, if Dave Fravor is lying, he should get an Academy Award. But I believe David Fravor is saying honestly what he saw. Right. And I don't have a problem with David Fravor, Alex Dietrich. There are too many people that were there. Kurth did not see the Tic Tac himself, but he was circling around above the others when the whole event happened. He saw the disturbance in the water. They were all sent out there for something. The problem I have is the information that's coming out now that's just being handed to us.
Right. Well,
And
I think we all do. And I want to just say really quickly, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but thank you, Dave, for the generous super sticker. That is really, really awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
yeah.
But anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's quiet. It takes money to fund everything, and I may come to you for that one of these days. Anyway, the part of this that doesn't make sense is, for example, when Lou, this is where I started thinking, when Lou sent the email to the OSD complaining about Sugao, I think this was back in 2021, and he had sent that letter to her. None of us should have seen it. We weren't expected to see it. But within 2 months, Alejandro Rojas sent an FOI request for it. And I'm like, how did he even know Lou had sent it? Now, I know Alejandro may have been hoping to do some work with To the Stars. And, Alejandro's been nothing but nice to me, so I have no problem with him. But I was always curious, well, wait, the only thing I could figure is Lou must have told him he sent this letter to Sugao, and Alejandro immediately sent an FOI request for it. And I checked this with Alejandro, and he got the letter that where Lou was complaining and explaining all these names of people who could verify he was there, a full list of high-ranking people. But there was one name blacked out. And a young guy that I've talked to named Justin, who I give him credit for this, who realized that if you took the paper over when it was first scanned in on a photocopier, you could turn it over and see through the back side before it had been blacked out, and you could make out the name. And it was Stratton. So obviously Lou knew Stratton, but for some reason, after Alejandro got the letter with all the normal redactions that you get from the FOIA departments, somehow he had to come back and cross out in black, or in other words, somebody told him black out that one name. And later on, yeah, it turns out it was Stratton. But then I'm like, okay, but so my take is Alejandro had to have been told either by Lou or someone that Lou had even sent the letter. 2 months to get any FOI request, 2 months is pretty good these days. So Alejandro got it. It's like, okay, so Lou sent the letter in, but then I'm guessing, did he tell Alejandro, and Alejandro got it? But Alejandro released it on Reddit. He didn't publish it on one of the Facebook groups or, somewhere Open Minds or someplace like this. It was just put out on Reddit. So it got out. Then the OIG form comes out. I didn't know anything about the IG complaint form until Stephen Greenstreet, much to his credit, whatever anybody wants to say about him, I think he's a straight shooter. Yep. Stephen Greenstreet shows it in the presentation that he did with some sections blurred out on it. And that's when I realized, okay, well, he got a copy from somewhere, but he certainly couldn't have gotten it from the IG department because it's an ongoing investigation. So they didn't release it to me. They didn't release it to Greenwald. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that for a long time there, Greenstreet was a supporter of Lou, or had a positive outlook on this whole thing since 2017. So I'm thinking somehow he had to get a copy of this from somebody who had one. And Lou is the only person I can think of who would have had a copy of it. So I don't know whether Lou gave it to Stephen Greenstreet or somebody who got it from Lou gave it, but how did it even get out that Lou, if he sent it to the IG department, why would he hand it to anybody out here in the UFO community? And of course, as happens on the internet all the time, pretty quickly, somebody else got a copy of it, and there you see all the names in it, and there's Stratton's name in there. But I'm thinking, wait a minute, why are we leaking all of this juicy information out there, naming Stratton as having come to Lou in June of 2008? I mean, some part of this, I think the Nimitz incidents occurred. I think perhaps the Nimitz incidents were a bigger deal that was supposed to just die, because we all know for several years nobody heard anything about the Nimitz case. And to my understanding, it probably all credit to Paco Chierici when he finally wrote the article, the X-Files edition on Fighter Sweep, where the whole story began to come out in early 2015. But you also notice in 2015 is when a whole lot of things began to happen. Tom DeLonge gets started. Kit Green talks to Tom DeLonge. They get in touch with Hal Puthoff. Over the next couple of years, they've been talking to Lou all this time. Suddenly we have To the Stars coming out. It's like Tom DeLonge got co-opted from his Air Force generals. Then all of a sudden Lou's involved. Now we have To the Stars coming out, but it's a staged presentation. And then all of a sudden at the end of December, Lou is put out there as this whistleblower. And I'm like, first off, he supposedly resigned, but according to what Jeremy McGowan has indicated, that maybe Lou's telling people he didn't really quit after all. I mean, all we've seen is his letter to Mattis. We haven't seen the DD-214 or whatever it's called. But I guess the part of this that gets me the most is in everything I've looked at, the story that was told to us in December of 2017, the newspaper articles stating Lou was a whistleblower and the $22 million was at the Pentagon, the $22 million for ATIP, which it wasn't. $22 million was for OSAP, which Lukatsky and Colm Keller clearly stated in their book. There was no money for the Pentagon. It was $22 million for OSAP. ATIP was just this carry on little program. So why didn't they tell us that way in 2017? The story would have held together just about the same, except that we would have been looking at Bass and the OSAP contract, and Lou and everything else would have been incidental fallout from that. But instead, and you know what, to me, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm just very disappointed when I think that everybody who worked with OSAP, everybody who was in the precursor to even the To the Stars in 2017, anybody who knew that the $22 million went to the DIA contract with Bass back in 2008, that there was no $22 million for the Pentagon. Lou was somebody at the Pentagon who ended up being the person they were talking to, but even that was ATIP. But everybody knew that the $22 million was not for ATIP at the Pentagon. And they published it that way, and they promoted it that way since the end of 2017. And that tells me, you know, you can call it disinformation if you want to be nice about it, or intentional misinformation as opposed to a flat out. But why would they mislead us at the beginning if this was supposed to be an open whistleblower disclosure, whatever you want to word it?
That's a great question.
See, something tells me we are not being led down the path of truth.
No.
If you start out, you know, Edward Snowden, he laid it out. This is exactly what happened when he flew off to Hong Kong, and he ends up in Russia because he's telling exactly what occurred that he didn't like. It's the truth the way it was. And they're after him because he told the truth. But Lou and everybody else, and I don't know Chris Mellon, I tend to have a lot of respect, a very, very intelligent guy, you know, but they've all served this country. I mean, I'm not trying to get to be a patriotic or whatever, political about it, but they were all serving this country, and this country is us. You know, we're the people. We have an interest in this. We're not out to mislead. You know, maybe not all of us, hopefully, but some of us maybe. But now there's something wrong here, and I think it's a mistake for everybody to just keep holding on to this belief that they like and believe it's all going to be disclosure and they're all Boy Scouts. And because something tells me, well, you know, for example, Alex Dietrich, the female pilot that was Fravor. How can you not have respect for anybody that would put their life on the line, potentially go out there? I have a lot of respect for them. Chris Mellon's website, we've all seen the documents that were supposedly found on his whole website. Now, Fravor came out at the beginning saying there was no video. He did not get any video of his encounter. He talks about the gun camera, or headset rather, that he was on. And nobody talked to Alex Dietrich until they finally did, I think it was the 60 Minutes interview. And of course, he's the commander. I don't know how that must be, but I'm sure you still defer to your commander. But we began to pick up little things. If you go back and listen to some of Fravor's early interviews where he's talking about the tapes, you know, my tapes. I went down there and said, I want my tapes. And you got 2 minutes to give them to me or I'll tear this place apart. You know, Fravor's made these statements in some of his early interviews. I think Joe Rogan maybe was one of them. But he's talking about my tapes. He didn't say Chad Underwood's tapes, the Fleur 1 video that everybody's seen, because Chad Underwood didn't go out until Fravor and them had already come back. And then if you go looking at the documents that were found on Chris Mellon's site, which had the little pictures of the DVDs or the CDs that supposedly had the 3 videos on it. But there's also an interview that was done with Alex Dietrich. And in the interview, she clearly states that Fravor had his gun camera tape. They went back to the ready room because when nobody came to interview them about it, he slammed the door, made copies of his tapes, and she wrote her notes and sent them home to her, to her aunt, or saying this is some X-Files shit. But she makes it very clear that he had the gun camera tapes from his plane, not Chad Underwood. Now, I'm not saying that that's the video that back in 2020, I filed the FOI request and the Navy came out and said it's classified grave damage to national security. Although I had written back to them later and I said, if that's a video was one of the 3 that's already out, then just tell me, because it's a moot point now. I don't need to worry, but they're still working on that one. I've never heard any more on it. But that's why now I think there must be a tape if we're to believe that interview. My point is also, but Chris Mellon had it on his website that somebody could just go to his site and download it. Who would do that? You'd put it on My Drive, or you'd save it somewhere else, or you just put it on your site with no links so nobody can just click through it and find it, unless you wanted somebody to find it. And maybe it was true, in which case if it's all honest and Mellon wanted everybody to find it, then kudos to him for that. But, in fairness, I did try at one point to write an email to Chris Mellon, and I even tried to write to Alex Dietrich, because I'm like, is this true? Now, the last thing that I'm looking at, which I think is curious, because I mentioned Kurth a while ago, that I thought it's funny, and I get it. Maybe he's had enough up to here after Bigelow and all of this. But once again, like I've said, why wouldn't they have told Kurth that they already knew about the Nimitz case at some point? If Harry Reid had told Bigelow and Hal and Eric Davis knew about it, why at some point wouldn't you tell him, we heard about this in 2000? So for some reason, he even said to me, could they have been gaslighting me? Kurth deserves a chance to come. I wish he'd go before the congressional committee and talk.
Right.
But this thought hadn't dawned on me in a while. Of the 5 or 6 people that were involved in the Nimitz events, the encounter, if you want to call it that, there's only 2 people that have been kind of cut out, or at least never have been called on. One of them is Kurth, although he's written to me, so I have a lot of respect for him. Although he told me he doesn't want to hear from me again, so I'll give you credit for that. I mean, I'm not saying he was happy, but he did answer. He did respond.
Wow.
So there's a guy that has my respect. But you'll realize you have Alex Dietrich and her backseater. I think that was Jim Slate, if I'm not mistaken. And both of them have come out and talked about the event. She did it, of course, behind shadows on the unidentified TV series, and then later on 60 Minutes with Fravor. But you've got Fravor, you've got Alex Dietrich, Jim Slate, Kurth. But Fravor's backseater, a gentleman named Josh Apizito, I think, who was with him when they went down and circled down towards the Tic Tac, when they had the encounter and it took off, poof. His backseater, gone. Nobody's ever talked to him.
Interesting.
And then it occurred to me, if I'm not mistaken, Chad Underwood, who supposedly took the Fleur 1 video, and he's come out and talked about it, if I'm not mistaken, he's the backseater. I don't think he was the pilot. And it began to dawn on me, maybe Fravor is being literally or technically correct when he says he didn't get any video. Because even when Alex Dietrich says the gun camera from his plane, maybe it's Josh Apizito, the backseater, the flight officer who's running all the equipment, who actually took the video with a gun camera. And that's why they can say Fravor never got any video, and so nobody asks. And so just in the last month or so, that dawned on me. Why would Apizito, who I think was stationed up in Alaska for a while, but now he's the flight officer on the Nimitz refit. So he's moved way up in his position. But so I sent another request to a whole bunch of different departments, including the Naval Air Warfare Center and otherwise, requesting any video from that event that was shot by either, so to speak, David Fravor or Josh Apizito. So now they're working on that, and we'll see if that comes up. But I'm at this stage, if I had to look at the documents there, and if the interview with Alex Dietrich, she's an honorable woman. If the interview is the way it was said, then there is an actual video of the Tic Tac event. It's just, I don't understand why no one else has brought that up. I mean, that's interview's been out there and anybody could read it, but if you put two and two together, you'd realize. And in the article, the paper I wrote called Fravors Tapes, I went over several other things that were said by other people as well that would hint at having gone back and seen a tape in the ready room after the incident occurred, which would suggest there's a tape out there someplace. But for whatever reason, they're dodging us on admitting to it. But I don't know. I wish everybody would listen to your interview with Jeremy McGowan, because it raises big questions about. And I don't know. I want to like Elizondo. I want to like anybody who put their life on the line for our country. I want to like all of them. But at the end of the day, it's like, I read an interview talking about how some of us feel like we have no real clout out here. I mean, I can write FOI requests. I wrote one to the NSA for some stuff, and they basically write me back saying, these statutes say we don't have to tell you anything. So it's like, go away. And you have no recourse. You can appeal it, but then on appeal, they just say we upheld it. So inside that, although I appreciate secrecy, but you realize to some extent, I saw a great quote in an article written by a Russian guy talking to some of his friends about the Ukrainian situation. And one of his friends said something to the effect of, you and I are but just dust on the chessboard. And you realize there are powerful people up there. I'm certain there are connections between them and the military industrial, I hate to use that term, I'm not trying to cite Eisenhower, but industry that's making big bucks on these contracts. And now it's one hand washes the other because neither side wants to talk about it. But I think expecting anybody in the military to come out and tell the public anything, that's not their job. I mean, it's not their job to be information, their defense.
Right.
But who do you go to? Who do you go to stand up for some of us? Because I have a lot of questions. But Alex Dietrich's never written me, and Chris Mellon's not written to me, and Douglas Kurth, I'll buy him a drink any day because he at least had the decency to respond, even if I aggravated him. But other than that, I think there's a lot more to all this, but people need to get below the surface layers and start looking at the conflicts down below, and you'll realize that there's a lot more going on there.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing that's been so amazing to me. The more research I do and the more I dig into specific people, their connections, business, political, some of it, I mean, just, it's been shocking to me. And I think that everybody needs to just step back and, when you hear somebody talking about a sighting, or you hear specific people who've been steering a narrative that is really over 50, 60 years has produced nothing but confusion, it's like, gotta start holding people accountable for that disinformation, misinformation, which in my opinion is harming a lot of people. I mean,
Well, it is. It's funny because there was an analogy that I thought of the other day, because I've had people asking me still about the Paul Bennewitz situation. Right. And why wouldn't the Air Force just go to Paul and order him to stop filming or doing whatever he's doing? And you're like, well, because that's an admission of some sort. You've acknowledged, it's like confirm or deny. You can either do that because you don't want to even deny it, or But then it occurred to me that one of the funny analogies is that we're treated like chickens in the yard, and they just scatter chicken feed out there, and everybody scatters, and we're all occupied. But at the same time, if you've seen some of these videos of planes being chased by fighters and they release the anti-missile fire, they don't just try to dodge them. You just scatter. Also, doesn't matter what the missile follows, as long as it follows something else other than the airplane. And I see some of that kind of analogy with what is being thrown out here. You have Jim Simivan talking, and I've never met Jim Simivan either, so I have no issues with consciousness studies. I have no issues with interest, and we all have a lot of interest in those things. But Simivan is talking gin and who knows what else, and and they're going to, who was it, the Bledsoes, and they're talking to them about something else. And then Lou supposedly was presented as a whistleblower, but then if I understood it correctly, this whole business about Congress maybe offering some protections for whistleblowers, but then Mellon seems to come out and suggest, I think he was giving a speech overseas recently, that even if they give those exemptions, Lou probably won't come out, go be a witness. I'm like, well, then what are we blowing the whistle on? Or even, blowing the whistle is to bring attention.
And getting on the cover of GQ. That's what we're blowing the whistle.
I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know them. But at the same time, this is not being upfront.
No, it isn't. And I mean, they're pulling people in to, these behind the scenes groups, and they're, in my opinion, really taking advantage of people that are good people, and I think they're very maniacal about that. And I think that when you look at some of the UFO sightings that they're supporting, I mean, they obviously don't know what they're talking about. That's very
look at the analogy of what, and I mean, to this day, Doty's out here still spinning his web, but everything that's been said about what was done to Paul Bennewitz was find what they believe, and like Bill Moore said, then you stuff them with as much disinformation as they can handle until it finally they almost implode with it. But you don't just deny it; you just shove it into them and manipulate them, so then they'll go off on a tangent.
Right.
And if you think of what Jeremy McGowan was talking about, and I think he was being very upfront about his issues after he came back from the war and his marriage and how distraught he is. Who has a heck, in the last couple of years, plenty of us have been in that position, not knowing where the future is going to go. And then now you hear what he's saying, that Sean Cahill and Lou Elizondo were supposedly feeding him, playing along with him, suggesting things. And once again, you find them seemingly manipulating what he needed, right, emotionally or psychologically, but also some of his beliefs or a sense of wanting to be a part of something bigger. And you then twisted, if it was a simple grift, you'd call him a con man.
Right.
But at the same time, it's manipulating people's beliefs. And if you look at the whole UFO community, and let alone the world, coming out in 2017 and presenting Lou as a whistleblower, all eyes focused only on him, and now he's the Edward Snowden of ufology, and he's supposedly going around conferences and he's talking about all of this stuff. But it was all crafted to present him as that, especially if you think back in 2008, he says to somebody, what do you think of UFOs? And he says, I don't think about them at all. So you're thinking, only in 7, 8, 9 years, he's now become the go-to. I'm like, people should go to Jan Aldrich, Barry Greenwood, some of those old guys who have seen a thing or two, and the people who've been around enough to realize, I've seen this kind of thing before. And yes, I began to see analogies between what was done to Paul in order to control the narrative once it began to get out publicly. And it went on for 10 years before Bill Moore's speech. And here's Doty still out there saying the same thing, and apparently Hal Puthoff hired him for something for a while there. And now you've got Lou and everybody else coming out, and it's almost like they want to shove the whole UFO scenario so much down everybody's throats that nobody will know what to believe anymore. And maybe we'll all just eventually go back, back to sleep. I don't know.
It is really, for me, and I mean, the whole Bennewitz affair, I mean, all of this stuff and what I've, experienced personally, I mean, it's like there are these little puppet masters that will approach people who have a genuine interest and feed them information. And I look at what happened with me with Skinwalker Ranch, and I just think, wow, I mean, here you've got person A here giving me this information, hoping that I'll put it out publicly, and this person and this person, and it's just like it's, they're filling you up. They are, and thank you, Simon. They're, it's like they're profiling you. They're using like used car salesman techniques on people.
You posted Simon's question here, and I'm reading it around my camera. Defense technology. a really more intriguing thought that occurred to me the other day because of the way that they are pushing this whole they're pushing the alien side as hard as they've ever, well, at least as hard as they pushed it in a long time. And as you know, we talked about before, those of us who've been around long enough, that's why if you ask me the best cases I can think of, they're from a good ways back, 64, 70 or beyond, because nobody had that technology then. We haven't seen any of it now. So the UFO phenomena is based on something real, but it's his question about secret defense technology. It began to occur to me because of a number of things that, and some of the things Jeremy McGowan had said as well, that if you had a technology, let's just for a moment, this is hypothesizing here, something like the Tic Tac really was something we developed, whether we got ideas from something we've been working on for 50 or 60 years, and finally we've realized some way to make some of it work, whatever you want to call it. But whoever's been building that, it took a lot of money. And so somewhere in the government, somebody's had to either put some grant money into it or black money that's sent to a company that then sent it to a subcontractor. So there's cutouts all the way. And I mean, yeah, we've heard a lot of stories like this, but where would you go to show it? At some point, in my opinion, you're going to have to show it to the people who are putting up the money. Mm-hmm. They want to see that you're not just taking the money and blowing it off. You're going to, and we've all heard about the famous new aircraft, right? They slide open the hangar doors and there's fog and they roll it out and all the senators and congressmen are drinking their wine or whatever it is. And it's the contractor is showing what the product is because they want to get the contract next year. They want to get money for the next version of it. What if the Tic Tac was something we wanted people to see, but you can't do it over the land because there's too many houses, too many people around. You can't fly them to Area 51. There's too many people out there and you don't know what, you don't want people to see it. So what if you have people sitting around watching it on screens? People who are keying into, there's actually a piece of equipment called the Snope or something. Anyway, it's a large piece of equipment mounted under the planes that is used to actually feed information back to a ground station. I'm paraphrasing it badly. But my point is, you also want to show it, but you don't want to do it out in the middle of nowhere. So you wait till your carrier group is out there doing something that the Chinese and the Russians are not going to get too close to them. But you want to see what the effect is on your own pilots. And so you set up this presentation where you put your Tic Tac out there and you have the pilots, they can pick it up. You have the pilots fly out there and you get the reaction of your own men to seeing this thing they've never seen before. And it's startling, but somebody's sitting back and watching this display and looking at how effective it is when Fravor goes heading towards it and poof, it's gone. And you've just now maybe shown your technology to the people who are holding the paycheck, the pay stubs, and you've shown them, we can fly this thing out there over the surface. It beats the heck out of our pilots. Look at their reaction to it. But then if it ever comes out, you play it off as though it's an ET UFO or whatever it is. You don't know what it is because now the Chinese and the Russians, they don't know that you've got it either. They're thinking maybe it really was a UFO and your own pilots saw it. You see what I'm getting at? You presented a scenario where your own highly developed experiment, not even necessarily experimental craft if you're flying it out that far out over the ocean, but you set up a scenario so that you let people see what it can be and you get the your pilots are stunned by it. The people who are watching everything realize this is the greatest thing ever because our technology is way above everybody else, even our F-18s. But if it ever leaks out, your own pilots are going to claim it was a UFO, just like the article that Paco Chierici wrote, X-Files. This is some wild stuff because if it gets to the Russians and the Chinese or anybody else, and now today, now that it's become highly public and we're all talking about it, you want to push the UFO side. I mean, oddly enough, in the last month or two, something I found that I didn't realize I'd missed it before has led me to question what Paul Bennewitz filmed. Because suddenly I realized that not long after that, right about the time he was talking to Myrna Hansen and it comes out, there was a whole lot of things being changed. Convoys hauling material in and out of the Mazana weapons storage area. People that were being totally laid off, they were redundant anymore, and suddenly you're short-handed because, I mean, it was actually a document written about the changes that were taking place. And you realize all of that was happening right at that time that, and I had speculated on exactly this when I wrote the book, because you'll notice the line of these objects coming down were spaced about 250 feet apart. I think we talked about this before, which in that area was roughly the distance from spread apart that the bunkers were. And if you were having a dog and pony show where you're landing objects together, if you're the Pleiadian ambassador and you're all coming together, you'd land close together. You wouldn't stretch out by 250 feet apart in a line, you know, unless you were lining up where maybe some of the bunkers were. And I began to think, I know Kirtland changed over a lot in the years after that, but I didn't realize so many things were changing, that they were moving things in and out. Convoys, that's the word that I read in the documents, had convoys, 60, some amazing number of convoys of material that was being moved around. And I thought, I wonder if there was something in there that somebody had to get out of there. I don't know. I've never been sure, and I'm not claiming what Paul filmed were ETs any more than I'm claiming it was ours. It was just the fact that whatever happened, FOSI and the powers that be went after Paul.
Right.
They didn't, they were more interested in shutting him up as opposed to even talking to him about what he saw or trying to just talk to him as a human being. So I don't really know. Maybe nobody knows what the Tic Tac was. I don't know. I can speculate on all sides of it, but I can certainly come up with a theory to cover everything. But
yeah, no, I think it's all fascinating. And I've got to, because Dave asked a question a while ago, and I want to just ask you this really quick. So did you read what Cahill stated about Fravor's opinion about the Tic Tac per Jeremy McGowan?
Yes, I believe it was the effect that Fravor said he kind of thought it was probably some secret development of ours. I'm paraphrasing that. But that was one of the things I was kind of mentioning a while ago. And of course, I have not heard Fravor say that outright in any of the interviews or the conference that I saw him at. I have not heard him come out and say he thought it was one of ours. I can imagine if you don't know what it is, nobody knows whose it was or what it was. Maybe it was, like I just came up with a moment ago. I can come up with an interesting kind of a hypothesis for what if it was one of ours. I do know, if you look at Fravor's face and you look at all their faces and whatever it was, like he said, he'd love to fly one, but I don't know. I'd love to hear Sean Cahill, because some of the things Cahill said about Fravor, if I was Fravor, frankly, I'd be pissed off. I mean, literally, for the Cahill saying that nobody liked Fravor was this, that, and the other. And I'm like, you should get Fravor on your show and ask him what he thought about that. But I can understand the whole idea that the object suddenly, after it disappeared, somebody came on the radio and told Fravor it's sitting at his cap point, which nobody is supposed to know where that was. It's loaded into the computer, I think, and only the pilot's supposed to know. And so how would it know to go there? I mean, we can theorize. But in answer to what Waruna is asking as well, you can go back and I don't have any problem with anybody thinking it might be some of our secret tech. I can think that.
Right.
I mean, one of the funny things that I think from the old famous Papua New Guinea case with Father Gill, if you read what he wrote, what he said, at the end of the day, they needed to go inside for their evening, sermons. And they'd been seeing these things hovering out off the coast and waving at them. But even he said at the end of the day, they thought it was probably some new invention of you Americans. So even back then, the simplest explanation might be that it's a new technology that you or I haven't seen before. But that doesn't necessarily answer a lot of these old famous cases where somebody walked right up on this thing really close and saw it, okay. I would think if we've had that technology 60 years ago, where is it today? Certainly we've done amazing advancements since then. But I don't know, but they're right. I mean, it's like asking, where do UFOs come from? I can give you my 3 or 4 possible theories on it. My question is, I don't care. Finding out is going to be a heck of a discovery that we all should be a part of, because if we've got that technology now, why aren't we taking advantage of it? We deserve some. It's our money that is going to pay for it. We should be treated with at least that much respect, right?
Right, absolutely. And I think, that raises it's a great comment. It is our money. That was our $22 million. We are maybe spending taxpayer money to do specific things here in Utah. I don't know. And so those are questions that we deserve an answer for. And when you've got somebody like Elizondo who's coming out, and I'm a whistleblower, and I'm, blah, blah, all this, it's like, well, why don't you start asking some questions about some of these things? That's the thing. Time after time, there's no meat to anything that he's saying. It's all, this is going to be happening. This is, disclosure's coming. And we've heard that crap from the same group of people behind the scenes and in public for decades. It's ridiculous.
Well, if you're wanting to tell us the truth of what's going on, then just come out and tell it. Now, I can understand if there's, just like Admiral Wilson, people speculate that if he's got some kind of, if his pension's at stake or who knows what's at stake, then he may be wanting to wait until he gets some kind of a, immunity from that. And I can understand that, if they want to talk to Eric Davis or anybody else, and everybody's got a job, you don't want to interfere with your clearances on it, then fine. Let's have Congress come out and, whatever I may think of issues I have with Dean Johnson, he wrote an interesting article today in which he was talking about the possibility that some of the NDAA workings with this immunity that's maybe coming out from Congress may be coming up when the next, 60 days or whatever is coming up due here by the end of this month or next month. And I can understand if people want to just wait, if they want to tell people, look, you get me covered, so I've got immunity and I'm protected and my job is safe and my family's safe, I'll tell you everything you want to know. Fine, but we have no choice but to sit back and wait and hope that something like that occurs. But then I would think, well, I don't know, I would think Lou would be the first one to want to say that. But he may not want to come out and say that right now. In other words, it may be best to wait until you're protected before you even acknowledge that you might say something, so I don't know. I'm not trying to second guess, people on the things that we don't know. I just, plenty of things I don't know. We deserve to know it.
We do. And I think that's the thing that is it's common theme, here on my show and with people that I know that I'm really excited to know that are in the community, in my community, our community, people that are asking grounded questions and deserve and want the truth. And I think that it's just, I don't know, at some point in time, people need to look at people like George Knapp, or look at people like Jeremy Corbell, or people like that who are getting these leaked documents and leaked, videos and footage. Seriously, some of these, that would be illegals. These things would be it's like, come on, just very basic things. Do we really think these guys are the whistleblowers and saviors?
Knapp has always been polite to me. I've never met Jeremy Corbell. Knapp actually did, I think, the first interview back on Coast to Coast in 2012. So I will always, owe him for that. And everybody's out here, we're all trying to make a living, do whatever. So I don't have any problem with running your own show and whatever else. I do think there was a curious thing that I heard Knapp say in one of the interviews, and it's kind of a concern that I may have, that there may be some of these other people that were a part of a lot of this who were left in the dark, who didn't know, and maybe now don't even want to come out and say, which we've seen Stephen Greenstreet and I think Brian Bender kind of come out now and start to walk back some of their convictions about a lot of what they were told. But I remember hearing Knapp in one of his, or I think it was in an interview he did, where after the whole ATIP 2017 Lou Elizondo newspaper things came out, and the community begins to figure out that the 22 million was for OSAP, it was not for ATIP. And Knapp apparently went to Elizondo and said, why didn't you tell me the 22 million wasn't for ATIP, that it was for OSAP? And I think he says Lou's response was, well, I don't like to talk about other people's programs. And I'm like, wait, what? the program was OSAP, 22 million was for that. You took credit when the newspaper articles came out as the ATIP director, and it was 22 million for the secret Pentagon program. And nobody bothered to step up and say, excuse me, we need to correct this. The 22 million wasn't for ATIP, but everybody went along with it. But obviously, if what Knapp said is correct, nobody bothered to tell George Knapp when all this stuff was happening that the story he was being told wasn't completely accurate, which is what we were mentioning a while ago. Why not just be honest about it to begin with? So I have to wonder, did Leslie Kean not know that the 22 million, the Leslie Kean, the newspaper people who wrote all those articles, were they led to believe that the 22 million was for Lou at the Pentagon, the director of ATIP? And they were not told it was for OSAP? Well, if that's the case, then why don't they step up now and say, do a Green Street or a Brian Bender and say, well, wait, we didn't know this. And it concerns me that, people wouldn't just step right up and admit, that, yeah, okay, I got played or I made a mistake or something, at least so we can all get back on the straight and narrow and keep moving. But
well, there are a lot of people making a lot of money. Not a lot of people. There are a few people making a lot of money promoting garbage. And I think nothing is more of a prime example than seeing some of the conferences that are being held in Utah and looking at, just absolutely unverified, claims that are, I feel, quite dangerous to people's that are vulnerable. And, it's like it's all fair game. And I think it's just gross. If you're making a claim that there is dangerous levels of ionizing radiation on your ranch, and yet you're, paying so-and-so to go give tours on the periphery of the ranch, and you're exposing everybody to this radiation. Seriously? Like, you're either lying or you're negligent or, all of the above. So what is it? And I think, we're also starry-eyed and oh my gosh, this is such a great, show, and they're telling the truth, and we're going to stand up and protect these people. And it's why, if you're, I don't know about you, you've been around this, you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. And for me, just to look at some of these things and look at the way people have been hurt, it's unconscionable.
The Skinwalker Ranch situation is interesting to me for reasons that I think have nothing at all to do with UFOs. That's a great thing to throw in there because it attracts attention. And I understand a TV show is out to make money. They want you to sit tight so you'll watch the commercials. It's all meant to be entertaining, so you'll sit there and watch the commercials. It's not a documentary. Okay, so maybe at that point their sense of morality, fair play is kind of a little bit flexible because they're just trying to make an interesting show. But the fact that the people who were paying the most interest at Skinwalker Ranch seem to be paying attention to the effects on people, the MRIs, Kit Green, then you have this talk of cattle mutilations or strange animal deaths, of course now that seems to be coming up, and friends I've had, Dave Perkins, which you may know, and Tom Bland, and all the way back to Tom Adams, that goes all the way back to the 70s when the cattle mutilation situation was going on, and where Paul Bennewitz's name, I think, first appears in the people who attended that CBI conference they had in New Mexico. And you realize back then when it was going on, Kenneth Rommel, we talked about this the other day, Kenneth Rommel was brought in to kind of a former FBI, I think, agent. But according to even Valet and a couple of others, but it was Kit Green who had a hand in getting Rommel hired in. I'm like, wait, so Kit Green was still in the CIA back at that point, but he had a hand in getting Rommel hired? I think Valet's the one who kind of said this. And Tom asked Valet, and Valet said, Kit told me. So it's like, so wait, so all these people are tied in, but these are people like, no offense to, I've seen interviews with Kit Green, and he seems like a very likable guy, and Gary Nolan especially as well. But behind the scenes, you realize they're doing things. Even when Bigelow bought Skinwalker Ranch, Kit Green was the director of NIDS at the time, but you see his name virtually nowhere. And he supposedly had a few, things of his own that he wanted before he took that over. Then they go through the whole Skinwalker stuff, virtually no UFOs, but you have people claiming to have seen unusual things. The whole term Skinwalker comes into play, and portals and whatnot. One person will see something and the next person by them won't see a thing. Then you go jump ahead, and now they sell the Skinwalker Ranch. But from what I understand, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, Kit and Hal had some connection getting to Brandon Fugel to have him buy the Skinwalker Ranch from Bigelow. And now you've got the whole thing starting up again under a new ownership, a TV show to boot. And I still have to wonder, who's the guinea pig here? Or is there something else going on? Because, I mean, with all due respect to your ex, who claimed that it was a year after he'd gotten out of there, they went and had him do an MRI. And you're like, okay, well, but, we've heard all this caudate putainum talk and how they go to, but that's biological effects that seemingly, I don't know how many UFOs are involved, but I don't see any out of Skinwalker Ranch. But it seems to me the people who are paying the most attention to all of this are people who are interested in the effects on, and then you've seen the recent shows on Havana Syndrome and all of this. Even Lukatsky's claim that the one time he was flown out to Skinwalker Ranch, suddenly he has this vision of a strange floating shape in front of him that apparently nobody else saw, and I'm like, this definitely has nothing to do with UFOs and seems a lot more some kind of mental effects going on here. So I don't know what they're doing out there at Skinwalker Ranch. And then Travis Taylor, who turns out having been a friend of Stratton for all this time, and Taylor supposedly a science consultant with the task force. But did he not tell anybody when he was working at the Skinwalker Ranch and he's out there pushing the UFOs with everybody else? Does he not tell anybody that, normally that's called full disclosure, right? You at least want people to know that, hey, this might be considered, a little bit of a contentious point here to say that I'm working with the UAPT task force while I'm also out here on this show pushing Skinwalker Ranch. Once again, I have no explanation for it, but.
Well, and I mean, it's interesting because I've talked to several people that have been in different groups, whether they're in the film industry or whatever, but they've been like, they've kind of caught, like they've been privy to or overheard conversations about Travis being this, guy behind the scenes and all this stuff. And it's like, they're just putting out these little breadcrumbs. So people will go, oh my gosh, this guy that's, that's clearly just getting paid to be here and there and do whatever he's doing for 10 years on the History Channel. I mean, it's like, it's just like, it's like a LARP. I mean, just put out little breadcrumbs, see how people are going to go, and see how people, it's, I don't know. The whole thing is ridiculous.
When you know if it comes out, it's going to be questioned. I mean, if you're supposed to be, I don't have any doubts about Travis Taylor's, his brains or his education or his knowledge, expertise. But if you're going to go on a show and purport to be talking about UFOs and ionizing radiation and all these things, and they've got strange things happening 1,000 feet off the ground and all of this kind of thing, and you're playing into the scenario that UFOs are seen over this ranch, and if people find out, because of the whole questions of ONI and BASS and ATIP and the UAP task force and who's running it and and you people are going to find out that you're actually working with those people the whole time you're doing the show, and it's going to raise a red flag in people's minds that, is this whole thing some kind of a setup? Are we being played on both ends? But it kind of goes back to what I wondered. Yeah, extraterrestrial soap opera is right. But it's kind of the same thing. I wondered why it's like they just scatter any kind of tidbit you like. They'll scatter it like a buffet. And it's not just divide and conquer, it's scatter and conquer, because people go your pet area that somebody's interested in, or they want to believe this or they want to believe that. And I see people that are just diehard supporters of Lou, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be. I'm just saying question your own beliefs. I mean, to me, it's the matter of if all you know is what somebody else told you, you don't know anything. You can think what you want, you can believe what you want, but don't sit there and claim and decide you're going to support somebody just because he said such and such. Double check it. You know, I mean, if you hand somebody a pill and say, swallow this, they're going to go, wait a minute, and they're going to question. But it seems like when it comes to this subject, people just swallow anything.
Well, they do. And I mean, this goes, for me, an interesting kind of line of research has been looking at the way the subject has been used over the decades to collect data, to mine data, to figure out what makes people tick, to throw in a conspiracy theory and see if somebody has a little teeny bit of distrust in the government. Well, then we can push them over here. And then we've got the FEMA camps, and then we've got A, B, C, and D, and then all of these, questions start popping up, and then it's just like this QAnon thing. It's like going down this rabbit hole, and then you're creating this discomfort, this disease, and it changes the world landscape, the political landscape. And I think, I've mentioned this before, to see certain radio shows and people in the UFO subject who have been very crafty about using, okay, we're going to talk about the paranormal, and then we're going to throw in a little bit of, distrust the government, or we're going to throw in, buy these herbal supplements, and hey, while you're at it, buy 50 guns and hunker down. And so it's like, you just think, wow, this, to me, the UFO field is about, and I think, and I can't prove this, but I would be willing to bet there are some big money names behind this that are steering the narrative for political reasons. And that is my feeling on it. And then I want to ask you about like Eric Weinstein and Peter Thiel and some of those people and their, what do you think about that and their efforts?
Well, once again, I don't know them personally. I just know what I've read. Eric Weinstein did an interview with Hal Puthoff that I saw, and I thought asked some very direct questions, caught him on some things. And like, wait, which people should do. Hal handled himself very well, and other than a few things like that I've seen of Eric Weinstein, you hope their heart's in the right place, and it seemed to be in that interview. Peter Thiel, I just know from what you read online and whatnot, although there was an article that came out just the other day that I saw where questioning him putting so much money behind certain candidates or some news company. I'm not sure I've got the entire story exactly straight, but some company that comes out saying things he doesn't like, and so he ends up buying them out and putting them out of business. Like, this isn't Russia. We have the oligarchs. We all sit here and complain about Russia and the oligarchs. But then you look over here and you realize there's these powerful people with big money to spend behind the scenes that apparently, if we're led to believe, and maybe there's the point. When I say we're led to believe, it's kind of what your point was exactly. At some point, you have to decide, is that the whole story? And before I'm going to act on it, do I need to dig a little bit more deeply to find out, we hear these at Facebook and the FBI going after these false sites that are that are manned by Russian or Chinese operatives, and they're getting on Facebook, social media, trying to influence, our people. And we think, oh, that's a horrible thing. But then if what we see going on out here is some kind of a operation by who knows who to maintain or control the American public's perception or to suppress the information on this topic, and we all end up suffering the stigma from people who don't know anything about it, who end up having only seen what they've seen on TV or these crazy shows, and they assume everybody's, off their rocker, and it becomes hard to kind of get a serious conversation going. But maybe that's ultimately the whole point. Same with Paul Bennewitz. You don't shut him up. You give him so much crap to talk about that the more he talks about it, the more people begin to wonder what, I may have mentioned this, I think I wrote it in the book, that when I first talked to Paul the first time, he sounded way out there. By 1984, 85, when I talked to him the first time, it was things that even I thought, this is some crazy sounding kind of stuff. But then I realized, because we had the documents from Kirtland, that he'd gone down to this meeting in November where the brigadier general was there. There were a lot of official people. They brought him down on the base to show them the evidence that he had. And to me, that was a disconnect, because I'm thinking, if he's just some believer out there in the public talking about aliens, nobody'd want to go anywhere close to that, right? They certainly wouldn't bring him on base. They'd tell him, call MUFON or call APRO or something, so I thought, when I finally asked him, I said, well, what did you call the Air Force about in the first place? Meaning, what was the first thing that made him feel it? And he's like, oh, it was the films that I got from my roof. And I was like, wait, what? What films? I'd never heard anything about them. If you look in the Kirtland documents, no mention of those films. And of course, the whole thing begins to spin this story to make him an incidental character. And then he's fed to this line of stuff that makes him sound like, and he trusted the people that he thought he could trust his government. And now I look at, really, the point is, if you look at that story, you're going to look at what's happening today, and you're going to be a little bit more hesitant to just immediately buy into the narrative that you're being presented. And sadly, we can hope some of those congressmen are as fully informed as you and me, or any of the old guys, the old guard, who know all about this. But I doubt they are. So if those congressmen only get briefings from either the agencies who don't want to tell them anything, or from the people who we're wondering about ourselves because we're confused,
right? And
they're not coming out and actually getting information from the people who've done this or have been at this a long time, who might show them the history of this. I would hope they are. And I think some of them may be behind the scenes. Maybe they're having their own assistants go do the phone calls, so it's not obvious. You can hope, but.
Well, I mean, anytime you mention the Wilson Davis documents in front of everyone, it's like, oh my Lord, where is some of this stuff coming from? That's pretty.
I don't know. I am curious, considering everything else that's been said, and that it's To the Stars was supposed to be this, we're going to come out and bring information to the public, and Lou's going to be a whistleblower. And this document, I realize it was written long ago, back in 2002, I think. But then when the whole thing begins to come up, Eric says nothing. Eric goes to Hal. Hal comes out and says, we have no comment. Security issues. And I'm like, wait, why wouldn't you at least acknowledge it? The admiral can still deny it. He can say whatever he wants. It'll become a he said, she said. But if you're out there promoting a side of the story that we're going to investigate UFOs, or we're going to build this technology, we have recovered metamaterials, or we've got this and that, and Kit Green is talking about the alien autopsy films back in the Nimitz days, and to this, yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, and they're willing to talk about all of this kind of thing.
Right.
And personally, I tend to think anything I've seen and read and heard about Eric Davis is he's pretty much a straight shooter, except, and I don't know what his, they may have non-disclosure agreements going all the way back, for all I know. So, but at the same time, they just go quiet, and it makes me wonder, what if Eric had nothing to do with the Wilson Davis documents, and he had knew nothing about it, and somebody had given a copy to Edgar Mitchell, but he was sitting on it. And at that stage, what if Eric's name was on this thing, or what if there was some initial interview? I don't know. Wilson, the only way I can see Wilson being honest is if he never met Eric. But suddenly this document comes out through Edgar Mitchell, is found, claiming that Eric wrote this and he was in this car. And I'm thinking, what if Eric is like, what the is this? And he's thinking, wait a minute, how did this get to Edgar Mitchell? And he calls Hal, or maybe Hal or Kit Green. No, I'm just speculating. This is sheer conjecture, of course. And Hal or Kit Green are like, don't say a word. This was an operation we needed to handle. And in other words, what if the document was just made up to send to Edgar Mitchell, but Edgar Mitchell sat on it, or he talk up some story, and until it came out, what if Eric didn't know anything about it. What if he had nothing? Why is my name on it? I mean, my point is I can come up with some intriguing scenarios and now Davis is like, oh crap. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking I can't say I've heard Eric say more things that I think were provable, things that you would eventually be able to come out and substantiate, than I've had any reason to question, things that he said. I just don't understand why it's so hard for all of these players to just be upfront.
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't Fravor and Alex Dietrich just come out and say, yeah, we got a video. And when they came on the ship the next day, it was gone, something like anything. They could, when everybody came on and took all the data, they could. I mean, I guess, Fravor has said that. This is the other odd thing. He even said early on that he made a copy and put it in the tape and said, hold for commanding officer. But then later, I guess they reused the tapes and as though it was gone from the safe. And I'm like, gee, I wonder how many people would walk in and see hold for commanding officer and just take it. I don't know on a ship like that if you'd want to take some, but then again, there's a tape that he says he put in the safe. He didn't say it was Chad Underwood's tape 3 or 4 hours later. So why these people wouldn't just come out and say, yeah, we got a tape, but don't ask us to show it to you. We don't have it. Okay. But that would at least be honest. Why wouldn't anybody else come along and just be honest? Tell us. If they didn't know that in 2017, the newspaper articles, they didn't know this was baloney, that they were being fed a line, then come out and say it. I have no problem with somebody correcting themselves, and fine. We all straighten out and keep going. But to keep going with it and to hear the kind of things that Jeremy McGowan was saying, that he's hearing from Lou and claiming this, and Sean Cahill saying things, and then Lou saying, I didn't really quit. I mean, how is this good for how is this good for Jeremy McGowan? How is this helping? What's he getting out of this?
Right.
Heat, from what I understand, but as yet to this day, I haven't seen anything by the other two guys coming back saying he's lying through his teeth. They just said, well, here's a friend that we trusted, but they've not. So I don't know. That's not nothing I can do about it except, you pick your battles, right? Pick your battles. But anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it is interesting. And it's like, what would Jeremy have to gain out of this? What would any of us have to gain out of this? I certainly have not had a fun time. Trying to expose what I've exposed or talk about my personal journey. But I feel for me, it's important because there's so many other people like me who are getting played and fed a bunch of garbage. And it's really destructive. And for me, at the end of the day, because of my own personal interactions with Eric and people like that, it's like I do hold them accountable for the kind of game playing and things that I've personally experienced. And it's, to me, I don't know how people could look at themselves in the mirror at night or tuck their children into bed or, just really think if they are going to meet their maker, that they're going to be in a good place. Because to me, lying and promoting things that are not truthful, that hurt people who are vulnerable, is just not a way to go. And I think for me, these are my own opinions, and you've got, yours, and you're very, I appreciate and respect, how good you are at just saying, hey, these are my opinions, and I don't know these people. I've never met them personally, and things like that. I have met some of these people personally, and I have opinions formed on based on my interactions with some of these people. And I think it is interesting. And you brought up something a while back where you were talking about the Kit Green and Bigelow and Fugal and Putoff. And I think that that's a really important thing that people who haven't been paying attention, to all of this and the players and how long this has been going on, way back when. We've got a great video of Fugal and Joe Firmage, and you could see Putoff there, and I believe Kit Green and some of the other people that were looking or working on this little gyroscope, and that allegedly there were many people that were potentially, bilked out of money And what happened with that kind of a relationship? It's interesting. There are behind the scenes things that have gone on for a long time in the same group of people involved in some interesting things.
Well, I mean, I'm all for, what you and I were thinking 30 or 40 years ago is not who we are now. And I don't hold it against somebody that they had a belief that they believed back in the day. I don't know whether Hal was really into Scientology or there was some other things going on back then. So I don't know. I mean, he answered the question, I thought, very eloquently when Weinberg asked him about it. And he said, back in the 70s, I did some things with Scientology and I don't do it anymore. It's the same thing, my same kind of a thing with Ray Stanford. I mean, now we hear consciousness being talked about all over the place, strange kind of effects. Bigelow paying $500,000 and a bunch of other ones for all sorts of things that Hal calls it remote viewing because he didn't want to use the term psychic phenomena or whatever because of the stigma that it had back then. So you come up with some other term just to try to get it before people who can at least look at it as scientists. Ray was involved in a lot of things back then, but all I say is look at some of those films he's got. Look at the images he's got. That's what talks. Even Gary Nolan has said, it's all about the data. It's the data that matters, what people think or impressions or whatever. And we can all be played because psychologically, I have this, not to get into a kind of a religious context to it, but I put it this way at times, when the devil comes for your soul, he's going to promise you what your heart desires because he's going to know. And if a psychologically, it's people who are involved in psychological operations or manipulation, con men. So I don't care who it is. We've heard all sorts of famous people who put their money behind things that we look at now and think, how could they have ever believed that? We're all that way. I mean, when I first met John Lear, I thought he was a great guy. Rest in peace, John Lear. But when he stood in front of me that one day and said that he and some other guy had made up the Krill memo. I don't know if you know that whole story, but this was way back in this. There was a document going around called the Krill, O.H. Krill, and it purported to be a document about an original hostage. O.H. Krill stood for Original Hostage Krill, and it was bunk at the time. It was like, who put this thing out? It was just nobody knew. It's like some of those MJ12 documents, and you think, where's the provenance for any of this stuff? And I happened to be in Vegas and visiting John one time, and I'd known him for a year or so before that, and he'd always been very nice. First time I met him was at the conference in Washington, and there were questions I had, but still, he's John Lear. He caught up. The guy had more flight certifications than anybody had ever seen. But then he suddenly stands there and tells me, oh yeah, he and some other guy made up, I think Bill Cooper had been at the house at some point. Bill Cooper, of all things, being interviewed at John's house. Mm-hmm. And during the interview, he made a comment to someone about having seen this O.H. Krill memo back when he was in the service. And John's telling me this. He's 5 feet from me in his house telling me this. And you can see pictures of him in his study, that study. And John says, during a break, he gets Cooper over and says, how can you say you saw this document? Well, I did. But John says, and I think I know the name of the person, but he said, this guy and I made it up. So how can you claim you've seen it? Boom. I'm telling you, I bet the blood drained from my face because I'm standing in the house with this guy who's just John Lear claiming that he helped this guy fabricate this document to help the guy get onto the lecture circuit. My point is, all I'm saying, and I told him right there, I said, John, how can I even be associated with you anymore? I'm not a Boy Scout. Don't get me wrong. I made plenty of mistakes in my day, but I can't just laugh this off. If it ever comes out, I can't laugh off the fact that I'm just laughing off a fabrication.
Right.
That was about it with John Lear, as far as I was concerned. But I don't know why he did that. I don't necessarily think John was, I think he and Doty were kind of on opposite sides of the good cop, bad cop fence, if
right.
However you can put it. That's just my opinion. But the point is, hey, I didn't know any different until suddenly it hit me. And I didn't know what John was saying was true or not. After that, I began to realize he began to say all sorts of crazy things that are just alien bases, underground shit, excuse my French, things that you hear there. And I'm like, that's when you realize this is just way off the deep end now. So I don't hold it against somebody who thinks they're being told the honest truth by someone that they should be able to trust, any more than Paul Bennewitz assumed, I guess, he could trust Richard Doty. And now Richard Doty says, oh yeah, the people like that are easy to fool. I'm like, what a smug response for a human being, let alone a family guy who comes to you trusting you. And in our own country, our services are not supposed to, if they'll come after your own people, who are we supposed to trust? So if there's a lack of trust, it's not, because there's not some reason to at least be cautious about it. But even so, I mean, as far as Hal goes, he had a company I have no idea what it would be like to have a company you need to keep going, to have to work that you need to do, what you get into, if the, contracts you've got that require you to do certain things, even when he'd been to visit Ray. And now I have to think he was probably, using some of the funding that came from the $22 million when he visited Ray. But okay, that's fine. If he didn't say anything about it to anybody, any more than nobody told anybody anything back then. But I wasn't there, so I'm not going to second guess that. It's just the things these days that I think the UFO community needs to be very, very cautious about what they're buying into and how strongly they're going to support somebody, because the more you support that person, if that person suddenly implodes and it takes everybody like a black hole, everybody's reputation suddenly suffers. And that's a big concern that I have, especially with the congressional things coming down, that I don't know what they know. I don't know what their requirements are. But I think everybody needs to be extremely cautious. The old fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. That kind of a scenario, that if you look back at the track record of these people, and they've already been misleading us up to this point, it's their job to rebuild our faith. It's not our job to decide we'll start believing everything again. But
has anybody that you know of ever asked Puthoff about his association with Doty and how he could come to terms with that? And do people that ask both of these people to be on the speaking circuit, do they ever hold that, do they ever call that into question? I mean,
no, I would think it, like the Scientology thing, I would think it was something that Hal could just come up and say, I had no idea, or he could come up and offer, some, if he wanted to. I'm not saying at the end of the day it's a big be all end all topic in ufology, although it is something to wonder about. And my understanding, even people like Jacques Vallée have scratched their heads over that one. Why would you even, the scenario with John Lear that I had, it's the scenario, even with this whole business with Lou Elizondo supposedly still doing some kind of a work for a space command. And I'm like, wait, if he got these films released and he resigned instantly and took those films, and suddenly he's on stage with To the Stars, and now he's going to show these films out there, that if you look at the documents, it really wasn't clear that he was planning on running with them out publicly. He did get them cleared publicly, but the documents seem to indicate more for just kind of internal and contractor use. But then he suddenly runs out there and he goes public and he's whistleblower. That's who he is. The Space Command has no problem deciding what might he suddenly run. You see, it'd be like if Edward Snowden came back. I might understand people would want to be certain that he's not going to just blow the whistle on everybody every time, which I'm not equating that with this, but I'm just saying you would think I would be a little more hesitant if I realized somebody had kind of been misleading the public over their involvement with this from the beginning. Not that he wasn't involved with ATIP, but to claim that it was 22 million and he knew it. He didn't immediately stop the newspapers and say, no, ATIP did not get 22 million from Harry Reid. Not at all. I do not want that hanging over me. He allowed it to happen. So I'm like, at that particular point, I have a hard time with, maybe nobody else really knew. In all honesty, I think Hal knew. Not that he had to say anything about it, but he knew the 22 million was for OSAP because he wrote the contract. He wrote the bid that got the contract way back then. He knew, Eric knew, Colm Kelleher knew, Lukotsky knew. At least Lukotsky and Colm Kelleher did make it public in the book, but we all kind of already picked up on that by that time because you'd seen the contract from the DIA. But I don't know, just some things, whatever's happening here is just, my sense is around 2009 when Harry Reid finally couldn't even get his SAP going, and he was now writing to OSD and trying to get an SAP going when he had a contract. He had a legitimate contract, or at least the DIA had taken the money, had a legitimate contract with Bigelow. It was being operated on. If you look at the documents that the DIA put out, they were producing on it, right? The DIRGs, they had gone beyond what they were supposed to do. Why Harry Reid couldn't turn around to ONI or whoever and just say, go away. This contract, I set it up. It's legal. These guys are doing it. You give them what they want or you come to me. Why he would suddenly want to turn around and turn it into an SAP, and he's going to OSD, and ONI is seemingly running the show since June of 2008 before the contract comes out. They're talking to Lou. They're getting Lou involved. Lou's involved in this meeting by June of 2009. Suddenly you got OSD involved, and Lou's documents that he's released name all these high-level people that knew what he was doing, and something changed. Harry Reid had a contract, Bigelow had a contract, and all of a sudden, poof, now Hal's reporting to Lou. Harry Reid's kind of lost control of this project that the $22 million was for. And I mean, the reason I mentioned the NSA a while ago is because if you go on the DOD, I think it's the DOD or DI reading room, the second year contract after this first one, the paying office for that was the National Security Agency. And I'm like, wait a minute. The 22 million, the DIA had the first contract, the OSAP contract. But when the second year was coming up, if you go look at the contract for fiscal year 2010, I guess, the payment office is the National Security Agency. And I'm like, so I wrote to them and I said, I was asking for any information they've got, communication, I think maybe even with Stratton or anybody else on it. And they're like, forget it. They're not handing over anything because it had somehow involved a contract with okay. So that's a nice little clever way to avoid having to release anything if you've got a contract with some, company and it's proprietary. But how did the NSA get involved? And why would Harry Reid go that way? There was another 10 million still to be paid. Why would Harry Reid suddenly kind of defer the OSD, trying to preserve ATIP as a special access program when the contract was legally signed with Bigelow Aerospace, doing what Harry Reid and Daniel Inouye and all of them supposedly wanted done to look into the whole UFO situation? Why? You see my point? There's a turning point in there where suddenly in the middle of 2009, it's just my feeling, something changed and all of a sudden ONI, and then even Lou said in one of the first conferences he did, someone asked him a question, well, when the money ran out, how did you keep going? And he said, I continued to work with help from the Navy and the CIA. I remember that because it was like a question out of the blue, like towards the end, and he suddenly says this, and I'm like, wait a minute, how'd the CIA get in this all of a sudden? So something changed in there. I just don't know what, but I think personally, I think the entire thing we've had since at least 2015 has been a way to mitigate and manage the Nimitz information, to maintain it until it just goes away, run it to ground. And you really don't hear that much about it anymore these days already. So it lasted about 3 years and now it's, nobody's really talking. So I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, all of it is so fascinating. And you, again, are such a brilliant researcher. I really love how you dig into things. And I'm just amazed at all the information that you've shared with me. And I appreciate that. And I want to ask, because Peter wanted me to ask you about Ray and why he decided to leave the UFO subject and not research anymore.
Well, Ray, I would say Ray hasn't. Ray is, my way of putting it, one of the most unique individuals I've ever met. He is definitely his own person. At the same time, his, visual acuity and awareness, and I do think there is some sense of you can call it intuition, whatever you get, that sixth sense. We hear police officers who get this sixth sense of things. But look at what Ray's managed to do even in the dinosaur tracks and paleontological field, just walking in streams that the experts said there's nothing there. And you go into his house, holy cow, there's tracks all over. Now Ray's got presentations of a really intriguing small, I think an ankylosaur that was in the Smithsonian. Ray spotted something on the grounds outside, not if everybody's not aware of it, on the grounds outside of Goddard Space Flight Center where his wife worked. Walking along, he saw a slab. Now it's a huge presentation. Everybody walked by there. Plenty of people said, I walk by there every day and I never saw anything. Ray, on the other hand, I don't know if it's heightened awareness combined with visual acuity and that gut feeling when you see something and you think this is different or what is it about this thing that's different? But when I first met Ray, the second time I drove to Austin when he was living down there and went with him. And I also realized we were going out to drive and we got a half a block down and he's like, wait, you got to go back. I left my camera. And I realized this guy's got a knapsack with that camera in it. He takes it everywhere and he's out there doing it. So you begin to think, we've talked about that plenty of times. People wonder, how come Ray sees everything? And he doesn't see everything. I mean, he's not walk outside and just see anything any day of the week. But over the years, his paying attention, his looking around. I mean, he didn't have his face in the cell phone back then. We're all out looking around. And, he's gotten things that I've looked at and I've thought, okay, maybe that one doesn't have as much wow factor as I would like. But there's a lot more than what I wrote about in the book. And I want people to understand the reason that I wrote. I do probably need to clarify this, and I've had people suggest I try to get this thing done in print finally. And Ray's offered to let me use some actual photos in there. I have a good reason. I won't mention it, but why I use my own, recreations in the book. It was not because the films are not there. And if you've seen some of what Kevin Knuth has shown, the film's there. But anyway, my point is we talked about this, and I think it's simply that Ray's, I don't know how else to say it. He's been tuned into this stuff. Now, he's getting older. I mean, we all don't get out as much as we used to, except you running the studio and all healthy and all that. But the point is, what Ray's got, everybody deserves to see. That was the issue that came up with the SCU conference a year ago in 2021. It never occurred to me that anybody would work so hard to keep anybody from just being able to see it. Kevin Knuth deserves credit. The guy's got some serious stones that he'll come out and stand by what he thinks. But I talk to Ray a lot. I talk to him every day practically. And other than the fact that bottom line is we're all running out of time, right? So we need to get on the clock and get going. And I'm encouraging him to go get this thing digitized. And, but he's 84, 85, he's getting on up there too. And he and his wife have things they're working on, the storms and stuff in the house, day to day, everything you've got going. But I still hold a lot of promise that he will. Now, he's not out of the field. Ray has been much more, you talk about people who really do research on this. I've spent some, but not as much as Ray, really looking at those images, getting down in there. And I've told him with the new advancements in AI, image, processing, denoising, the whole I thought, holy cow, get that film scanned. Imagine all the negative, individual images and the negative you'd be able to look at to see what's going on. And I'm hoping he will. That's the plan, at least. But like everything else, and it seems like every day there's something that comes up and you're just fighting it. And there's money, funding, which I'm going to do some fundraising. I will mention this. I've not mentioned this anywhere else before. If you go to my website, you'll see there's a link to XDesk Digital. I've wanted to do some documentary films. I've got one I've been working on Socorro because that's always been a pet interest case of mine. And maybe I'll open this thing up soon enough. But I also would like to do one on the Paul Bennewitz thing, just because I still think there's good information out there. But it's like everybody else, right? Getting the money to just gas prices these days, right, to drive to New Mexico, to drive to this, to buy a ticket, to fly someplace. Those things cost money. And at the end of the day, you hope, if anybody wants to help, this is just like what you're doing now. You're doing this for all of us. It's not just for yourself. You want to get the information out there. So at some point, it's just grit my teeth and try to go do a little fundraising out there and see if I can come up with the money to. I've got the gear. I bought the gear all on my own, so I don't have to have the, but you got to have gas money.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk behind the scenes and things. And I hope that, I mean, because you, like I said, I just love reading your work, and X Descending is brilliant. And X Desk Publishing, I can't even speak English right now, .com, but go look at your wonderful articles and the research that you've done. And there are a couple questions that I have not had a chance to ask, and I just have to say cloudy when I see your little thing on there. It just makes me smile. But let me just go back here really quickly, because I know that I will. Guys, if I have not asked your questions, I'm really sorry. This has just been such a great conversation. I get caught up in things. Okay, Bledsoe. Have you heard that Ryan Bledsoe has recently said that they're kind of feeling the invisible college manipulated them? Have you heard anything?
I have not heard that. The Bledsoe situation is not one that I spent a lot of time looking at. I've seen some of the things that they've said, the recent cover of some book with looked like a religious cover on it, something about UFOs and God or something. And I have no idea who's behind that. I did think it was peculiar that some time ago, especially when we first heard word of Hal's ultra-terrestrial paper, which actually I read the paper. I liked it. It was well thought out. It's something like, we need to shift from just collecting data to going out and doing more with it. That's a bad paraphrasing what it was, but it was I think a well-written paper, good thoughts. But the first time it was heard, of course, was when somebody, Jim Simivan, allegedly had given a copy to the Bledsoes. And I think maybe the younger Bledsoe posted a picture of it, and everybody suddenly wants this, what's ultra-terrestrial paper? Now, I think the term ultra-terrestrial does not have all the woo-woo that people might immediately think into it. If you read the paper, it's a good general term to cover the idea that he's talking about. But anyway, the Bledsoes, these images of, and when I hear too much talk about orbs, when it's just a little speck of light and somebody calls it an orb, or if you know enough about photography, it's a grain that's too close to the camera, it's out of focus and it looks circular. But beyond that, I don't know. These guys are making a whole lot out of it. And for some reason, Jim Simivan, I think Elizondo, were out there paying a visit.
Yeah, DeLong, I mean.
Yeah, I'm like, why would you, I don't know, the saying, you're judged by the company you keep. My situation with, John Lear, with other, at some point you're like, I know you want to be nice first and be right later, but still, you've got to be careful.
Right.
Who you're going to hang out with, and then they're going to be telling all their friends, "Oh, I'm a friend to so and so," and then those friends are wondering, "What the hell? Why would you?" So it's a careful thing to me. I mean, that's why I have a few close friends, and other than that, I'm a lot more. Well, my friends call me paranoid, but I call myself duly suspicious and hesitant.
I'm getting that way myself now. I'm like, dang, and and I just appreciate it's always so much fun to talk with you, and I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry that we had technical difficulties.
I need a better camera. I look really red. I'm really old.
You don't. You look marvelous. You always look great. So I appreciate it.
That's my daughter's house. She's got all the film aficionado stuff behind me here on the wall.
Cool.
So.
I like
anyway, any other questions? I do want to get to them. I don't want to.
You know what? I'm just looking through things. I think we all might have them all, but if not, then I'm just gonna have to ask you on again.
Well, let me mention one thing. I meant to clarify a moment ago about the book, because I've realized that sometimes I think people are missing this, and maybe I should have been more clear. I chose the two films that I talked about, the film that Bennewitz took and the film that Ray took. The two films themselves have no connection to each other. But it wasn't just that I picked two films and I wrote a book about two films. It was because eventually I realized both of these films get tied into the Air Force Research Lab. Because Bennewitz, at the time, it was the Air Force Weapons Lab, and back in those at the time, after he had the meeting down in November, one of the scientists with the Air Force had told him, "Why don't you put in for a grant?" Now, from everything I've seen, I don't know that anything ever came of that kind of a grant. But I thought it was odd that somebody would mention that to him. Why don't you put in for a grant for research? Well, later, when I realized what I found about Lake Mirabeau's work, it turned out by that time, he had also gotten a grant from the Air Force Research Lab's Propulsion Directorate. Now, all of these two things were different. They all eventually, within a few years, fell under the Air Force Research Lab. The Kirtland area became the Space Vehicles Directorate of all things, but the Propulsion Directorate is what was doing the research on Mirabeau's Lightcraft. Brilliant idea, brilliant guy. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from him for his ideas for the Lightcraft. If you look at the images, though, that began to be drawn about it, even while he was doing the research on the Lightcraft, Popular Mechanics and these others began to show this thing changing from what he originally drew it out to be a lenticular-shaped vehicle with a beam firing straight out of the center that he called the directed energy air spike. And that concept is what I first saw. And when I realized, wait a minute, that looks like what Ray had on film. This was before I even knew Mirabeau had been to Ray's house and seen those films. I saw that image, and that's what started it all. But then he eventually got a contract, or a grant rather, to work with the Air Force Propulsion Directorate out at White Sands or wherever, doing research on the Lightcraft images and whatnot. And Franklin Meade, the Air Force guy who was, I think, his program manager on his contract, they both ended up starting Lightcraft Technologies. I didn't realize, I may have mentioned this to you, until just in the last month, another, I think it was the young guy in Ireland who had sent me a link to a video he found in 2010 of Mirabeau giving a talk about his Lightcraft. And that was the first that I didn't even know this, that apparently he'd been going back and forth to a facility in Brazil where the US Air Force and the Brazilian Air Force were working on a project for the Lightcraft stuff at I think it's a hypershock tunnel down in Brazil. But I'm like, well, that might explain why he suddenly seemed to drop off the map at around 2010. Maybe he was going, I think he's retired by now. But to realize that, wait a minute, so some of this work that seemed to not go anywhere in the US may have actually been also being done outside the US in Brazil. I had no idea until he was talking about it, showing a picture of the huge facility in Brazil. And I believe it probably had something to do with, because one of his students at RPI was a commander with the Brazilian Air Force or something who'd been doing some studying up at RPI. But I'm like, a lot of these things that even new information comes out of nowhere. And I give full credit to people who catch these things and make sure they point it out, because we should start a collection, a database of our own for all of this information.
Right. And I need to have you back, because I'm just thinking of all these questions not asked tonight. Dang it. I'm just like, oh, okay. Yeah, you're coming back. I mean, just know it's going to be soon.
Anytime, whenever I can help. I'm glad to.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Amazing. And have fun with your daughter.
Same. Yeah. Well, I will. She's with her mom tonight. They're out having fun themselves. All right. Thanks a lot.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much. Bye. And yes.
Good night, everybody. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you.
Bye.
And I want to just tell all of you guys, thank you so much for your wonderful questions. Thank you for the donations for Patreon and the super stickers and everything. You guys are really wonderful. And I am going to be speaking at PanParaCon this weekend. It starts September 30th and goes October 1st and 2nd. And that is going to be a really fun group of people. I was interviewing Vanessa, who is in charge of PanParaCon last week, and I got so many great comments about her and how cool she is. I'm so happy she's my friend. But it's diverse and knowledgeable chorus of people from the paranormal, the occult, interesting authors, podcasters, occultists, paranormal investigators, artists. It's going to be a very, very cool show, cool conference. So you can go to panparacon.com to register for that. You can hear me speak. I'm looking forward to that. And next Friday, I will be interviewing Jeremy Vaeni. I had a great conversation with him yesterday. I'm looking forward to learning more. He did a lot of work on Emma Woods and exposing that. And thanks, Claudia and Jeff and Rodan and Peter and Simon, all you guys rock. Thank you so, so much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I would like to say I'm going to stay out of trouble, but you know what? I never do. So, all right, there you go. Good night.